The library was nearly empty at 2 in the morning. Just me and a few other desperate souls trying to cram a semester's worth of knowledge into our sleep-deprived brains. My corporate finance textbook stared back at me, formulas blurring together into meaningless symbols. The coffee had stopped working 3 cups ago, but I kept drinking it anyway, a bitter ritual of academic endurance. My name is Andrew Adams. I'm 20 years old, a junior at Northwestern University studying business because that's what everyone said would lead to a good job, a stable future, a life that made sense. But sitting here in the fluorescent purgatory of the Deering Library, I couldn't help but wonder if I was studying for a life I didn't actually want. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate. "Dude, you alive? Haven't seen you in 48 hours. I was about to respond when another message came through, this one from a number that made my heart skip. Grandma Rose. She never texted this late. "Sweet boy, I know you're studying. Don't worry about Sunday dinner. Focus on your exams. Love you." I stared at the message, unease creeping through my exhaustion. Grandma never canceled Sunday dinner. In 3 years of college, through finals and breakups and the flu, she'd never once suggested I skip our weekly meal. It was the one constant in my chaotic student life, the anchor that kept me grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. I called her immediately. It rang 4 times before she answered, and when she did, her voice sounded different. Smaller, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "Andrew? Why are you awake?" "Studying." "Why are you awake? And why are you canceling dinner?" "Oh, just feeling a bit under the weather. Nothing serious. You focus on your exams." "Grandma, I mean it. Your education comes first. We can have dinner next week when you're on break." But something in her voice told me we wouldn't. Something in the way she said "next week," like it was a foreign country she wasn't sure she'd visit. "I'm coming over," I said, already packing my books. "Andrew, no. It's the middle of the night, and you have that big exam. Corporate finance can wait. You can't." I heard her sigh, and in that exhale was everything she wasn't saying. "Stubborn boy, just like your grandfather. Learned from the best. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive from Evanston to her apartment in Rogers Park usually took 30 minutes. I made it in 15, pushing my ancient Honda Civic through empty streets while worst-case scenarios played through my mind. Grandma was 72, had been healthy as a horse my whole life. She'd raised 3 kids alone after Grandpa died when my dad was 12, worked 2 jobs to put them through school, never complained, never faltered. She was invincible. She had to be. Her apartment building was one of those post-war brick constructions that lined Chicago's north side, solid and unpretentious like Grandma herself. I had a key, had since freshman year when she'd pressed it into my hand and said, "Just in case." I'd never used it before, always knocked and waited for her to answer with that smile that made everything better. Tonight I used the key. The apartment was dark except for a light from her bedroom. I found her there, propped up in bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The woman who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd faced down my elementary school principal when he tried to suspend me unfairly, who'd been the immovable force at the center of our family. She looked fragile. "Oh, Andrew," she said and tried to smile. "You shouldn't have come." I sat on the edge of her bed, taking her hand. Felt too light, like bird bones wrapped in paper. "What's wrong? And don't say nothing. I know you better than that." She squeezed my hand with what strength she had. "You have enough to worry about with school. Grandma, please." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw her weighing how much to tell me. Finally, she sighed. "I had some tests done. Been feeling tired, Thought it was just age catching up." My stomach dropped. "And it's cancer, sweet boy. Pancreatic." Stage 3. The words hit like physical blows. Pancreatic. Stage 3. I knew enough to know what that meant. Had lost a friend's parent to the same diagnosis. The statistics were brutal, the timeline often measured in months rather than years. When did you find out? 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks? And you didn't tell anyone? I told your father, and James, and Susan, her children, my dad and his siblings. We're having a family meeting tomorrow to discuss options. What kind of options? She looked away. Treatment is expensive. And at my age, with this type, the doctors were honest about the chances. Your father thinks? She stopped herself. What does Dad think? It doesn't matter. What matters is you have exams. You have a life to build. You don't need to worry about an old woman's problems. You're not an old woman. You're my grandmother. The woman who raised me as much as my parents did. Who taught me to tie my shoes and make pierogi and stand up for what's right. Your problems are my problems. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and seeing Grandma cry was like watching the sun fall out of the sky. You're a good boy, Andrew. The best thing I ever did was help raise you. Then let me help you now. What time is the meeting tomorrow? Andrew, you don't need to. What time? She studied my face, saw something there that made her nod. 2 o'clock. At your father's house. I'll be there. Your exam. We'll still be there Monday. You might not be. It was harsh, but it was honest. We'd never lied to each other, and I wasn't about to start now. I stayed with her that night, sleeping in the chair beside her bed like I had when I was little and scared of thunderstorms. She'd never sent me away then, never told me I was too old or that her bed was too small. She just lifted the covers and let me crawl in, safe in the circle of her arms. Now it was my turn to keep watch. I woke to the smell of coffee and found Grandma in the kitchen, moving slowly but determinedly, making breakfast like it was any other morning. You should be resting, I said. I've been resting for 2 weeks. Hasn't cured anything yet. She set a plate in front of me, scrambled eggs, toast, the works. Eat. You're too skinny. Grandma, we're not talking about it until the meeting. Right now, we're having breakfast like normal people. Tell me about school. How's that girl you mentioned? Sarah? Sophia. And we broke up. Why? She said I was too focused on the future to enjoy the present. Grandma snorted. Sounds like she was too focused on philosophy to appreciate a good man. Her loss. We ate and talked about safe things, my classes, her book club, the new Korean restaurant that opened down the street. But underneath it all was the weight of what was coming. The meeting, the family, the decisions that would shape whatever time she had left. At 1:30, I drove us to my parents' house in Wilmette. The suburb was everything Rogers Park wasn't. Manicured lawns, houses that whispered money, the kind of place where people had gatherings instead of get-togethers. Dad had worked his whole life to escape the neighborhood where he'd grown up, to give my sister and me advantages he'd never had. I understood the impulse, but sometimes I wondered what he'd lost in the journey. You sure you want me here? I asked as we pulled into the driveway. I've never been surer of anything, Grandma said. Whatever happens, I want one person in that room who sees me as more than a problem to be solved. My parents' house looked like a catalog spread. Everything perfectly placed, nothing out of order. Mom answered the door in her weekend casual, where that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Andrew, we weren't expecting you. Her smile faltered when she saw Grandma. Rose, how are you feeling? Like I have cancer, Janet. How should I be feeling? Mom's smile became fixed. She'd never quite known how to handle Grandma's directness. Everyone's in the living room. Everyone turned out to be Dad, Uncle James, and Aunt Susan. The 3 kids Grandma had raised alone, now successful adults with their own families and problems. Dad was in his usual spot by the fireplace, looking every inch the corporate executive he'd become. Uncle James sprawled on the leather sectional, already on his second beer despite the early hour. Aunt Susan perched on the edge of a chair, fingers flying over her phone, probably managing some crisis with her real estate business. Andrew, Dad stood, surprised. What are you doing here? Don't you have finals? I invited him, Grandma said, settling into the armchair I helped her to. He has a right to be part of this discussion. Mother, this is really a matter for... Aunt Susan started. For family? Andrew is family. More family than some, considering he's the only one who's visited me in the past month. That landed like a grenade in the polite atmosphere. Uncle James had the grace to look ashamed. Dad just looked irritated. We've all been busy, he said. You know that. Yes, I know. Busy when I was healthy. I wonder how busy you'll be now. That's not fair, Aunt Susan protested. We're here now, aren't we? Because I'm dying. Yes, what devoted children. Mother, Dad said in his boardroom voice, the one that brooked no argument. Let's focus on the matter at hand. We've all reviewed the medical reports. The prognosis is not encouraging. Terminal, you mean? Grandma said flatly. Let's not dance around it, Robert. I'm dying. The question is how and where and who's going to pay for it. The treatments the oncologist suggested, Uncle James began, are experimental and expensive, Dad finished. Insurance covers some, but the out-of-pocket would be substantial. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for maybe a few extra months. Maybe. So we're putting a price tag on my life now? Grandma asked. How much am I worth, Robert? That's not what we're doing, Aunt Susan said quickly. We're being realistic. The quality of life during treatment would be terrible, Dad agreed. Chemo, radiation, surgery, all for a slim chance of buying time. Time spent in hospitals, sick from treatment, unable to enjoy anything. I watched this unfold with growing horror. They weren't talking about their mother. They were discussing a business problem, a cost-benefit analysis where Grandma was just a number on a spreadsheet. There are other options, Uncle James said carefully. Palliative care, hospice, making sure you're comfortable. Making sure I die quietly, you mean? Grandma interrupted. Without inconveniencing anyone. That's not fair, Dad said again. We're trying to consider what's best for everyone. Everyone except me, apparently. You're not being rational, Aunt Susan said. This is emotional, we understand. But what? But I should accept that my children, who I raised alone, who I sacrificed everything for, are sitting here calculating whether I'm worth saving. No one said that, Uncle James protested. You didn't have to. I can hear it in every word. The expense, the time, the inconvenience. Tell me, when you were 12 and needed braces, did I calculate whether the expense was worth it? When you needed a car for college, Susan, did I run a cost-benefit analysis? When you wanted to go to that expensive basketball camp, James, did I tell you it wasn't a good investment? That was different, Dad said quietly. How? How was it different? We were children. We had our whole lives ahead of us. And I have no life left? Is that it? The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father, this man I'd admired my whole life, struggle to find words that wouldn't sound as cold as his meaning. The reality is, he said finally, we all have families, responsibilities. I can't ask Janet and the kids to sacrifice. Sacrifice what? I interrupted, unable to stay silent any longer. What exactly would you be sacrificing, Dad? He looked at me like he'd forgotten I was there. Andrew, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that Grandma sold her house to help you with the down payment on this one. I understand she worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I understand she raised you alone after Grandpa died when you were 12. So explain to me what sacrifice you'd be making that compares to those. This isn't your business, Aunt Susan snapped. You're 20 years old. You don't understand. I understand that you're talking about our grandmother like she's a broken appliance you're deciding whether to repair or throw away. I understand that between the 3 of you, you make enough money to afford any treatment she wants. I understand that she gave you everything, and now you're sitting here debating whether she's worth anything in return. That's enough, Dad said, his voice sharp. You're being emotional. I'm being human, which is more than I can say for any of you. Andrew, Grandma said softly, it's all right. No, it's not all right. Nothing about this is all right. I stood, too angry to sit still. Do you hear yourselves? Do you hear how you sound? This is the woman who raised you, who went without so you could have, who never remarried because she was too busy making sure you had everything you needed. And now, when she needs you, you're what? Too busy? Too successful? Too important to care? We care, Uncle James said defensively. But caring doesn't change the reality. The reality that you're all selfish cowards? No, I guess it doesn't change that. Andrew, Dad stood too, facing me. You will not speak to us that way. How should I speak to you? With respect. The same respect you're showing Grandma? The woman's dying, and you're worried about your mortgage payments. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. She needs help. You have the ability to help. Everything else is just excuses. You're a child, Aunt Susan said coldly. When you have a career, a family, real responsibilities, then you can judge. Until then, what? I should sit quietly while you decide Grandma's not worth the trouble? I should respect my elders while they disrespect theirs. We're not disrespecting, Uncle James started. You're calling her a burden. To her face. What would you call that? Realistic, Dad said flatly. We're being realistic about a difficult situation. You're being monsters. I shot back. Every one of you. The room erupted. Everyone talking at once, voices raised, accusations flying. Through it all, Grandma sat quietly in her chair, watching her children reveal exactly who they'd become. Enough, she said finally, and something in her voice cut through the noise. I've heard enough. We all turned to her. She looked older than when we'd arrived, but also somehow stronger. Like she'd made a decision. I won't go where I'm not wanted, she said simply. I won't be a burden to people who see me as one. I'll handle this myself, the way I've handled everything else. Mother, be reasonable, Dad started. Reasonable? Like you've been? No, Robert. I think I'll pass. She stood, wobbling slightly, and I rushed to steady her. Andrew, would you take me home, please? Grandma, now, please. I helped her to the door, but she stopped, turning back to her children one last time. I want you to know something, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Every sacrifice I made, every double shift I worked, every time I went without so you could have, I did it gladly, because I loved you, because that's what mothers do. I never kept score, never calculated the return on investment, never wondered if you were worth it. You were my children. That was enough. She paused, looking at each of them in turn. But now I know. Now I know that I raised 3 successful people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. 3 children who learned to climb ladders but never learned to reach back and help others up. I don't know where I went wrong, But somewhere between the goodnight kisses and the graduation ceremonies, I failed you. Because I didn't teach you the most important thing, that love isn't a transaction. It's a gift. And gifts, by definition, don't require repayment. Mother, Aunt Susan started. I'm done being your mother, Grandma said quietly. Mothers are cherished. I'm just an expensive inconvenience. So I release you, all of you, from any obligation, any guilt, any duty you might feel. Go live your successful lives. I won't darken them with my decline. She walked out, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like a physical weight. I looked at my family, my successful, accomplished, heartless family, and felt something break inside me. I hope you're proud of yourselves, I said. I hope the money you save is worth knowing you're the kind of people who abandoned their mother when she needed you most. I hope when you're old and sick and scared, your children show you exactly the same compassion you showed today. Andrew, Dad reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't. Just don't. I'm done too. I found Grandma in the car, crying quietly. Not the dignified tears from inside, but body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. I'm sorry, I said, not knowing what else to say. I kept hoping, she whispered. All these years, even when they stopped calling, stopped visiting, I kept hoping that when it mattered, when I really needed them, they'd be there. That underneath the success and the selfishness, my babies were still in there somewhere. Maybe they are, I offered weakly. No, what's in there is exactly what I saw today. And the worst part? I made them that way, pushing them to succeed, to rise above our circumstances, to be better than what we were. I never stopped to teach them that better doesn't mean richer. It means kinder. We drove in silence back to her apartment. I helped her inside, made her tea, sat with her while she stared at nothing and everything. What are you going to do? I asked finally. Die, I suppose. On my own terms, in my own way. That's not funny. It's not meant to be. She looked at me, really looked at me. Andrew, you have school. Finals. A life to live. You can't. Can't what? Care about you? Too late for that. Can't sacrifice your future for my past. It's not a sacrifice if it's given freely. You taught me that. Maybe the only one who learned. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, I have some savings. Not much, but enough for basic care. I'll find a place. You'll stay here. And I'll help. Andrew. No arguments. You took care of me when I was little and needed help. Now I'm big and you need help. Circle of life. This isn't the Lion King. This is real. I'm gonna get sicker. I'm gonna need more care than you can give. I'm going to die? Yeah, I got that part. But you're not dead yet. And until you are, you're going to be surrounded by people who actually love you. Even if that's just me. Just you? She repeated and almost smiled. As if you're not worth a dozen of them. That was Saturday. By Monday, I'd made my decision. I sat in my advisor's office, watching her face cycle through confusion, concern, and finally, understanding. You want to take a leave of absence? Now? Andrew, you're 3 semesters from graduating. Your grades are excellent. You have that internship lined up for summer. My grandmother is dying, I said simply. She needs me. I understand that's difficult, but surely there are other arrangements. There aren't. Dr. Martinez studied me over her glasses. What about your parents? Siblings? Other family? They've made their position clear. I'm what she's got. Andrew, I admire your loyalty, but you need to think about your future. I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about the kind of man I want to be. The kind who abandons family when things get hard, or the kind who shows up. I've seen what the first kind looks like. I don't want to be that. She sighed, pulling out forms. A leave of absence can be for 1 semester or 1 year. After that, you'd need to reapply. Understood. Your scholarships won't hold. You'll need to reapply for those too. I know. Andrew, I need you to really think about this. You're 20 years old. This is a huge responsibility. So was raising 3 kids alone. She managed. There was no arguing with that. We filled out the paperwork, and just like that, my carefully planned future went on hold. Next came the harder conversation. I found my parents in the kitchen, having their morning coffee like it was any other day. Like they hadn't just voted to let Grandma die alone. Andrew, Mom said, surprised, don't you have class? Took care of that. I'm taking a leave of absence. Dad set down his coffee cup with a sharp click. Excuse me? I'm taking time off to care for Grandma. Thought you should know. Absolutely not, Dad said immediately. I won't allow you to throw away your education. Good thing it's not your decision, then. Andrew, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm being compassionate. I'm being a decent human being. All things you might want to look into. You're being a child, Mom said, making dramatic gestures without thinking through the consequences. The consequence is Grandma doesn't die alone. I can live with that. What about your future? Dad demanded. Your career? Everything we've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I corrected. I'm working for something else now. This is insane. You're throwing away your life for the woman who made your life possible? Yeah, terrible trade. Dad stood, using his full height to intimidate. It had worked when I was 10. Not anymore. If you do this, he said slowly, you're on your own. No tuition help when you go back. No rent money. No support. So exactly what Grandma's getting from you? I'll manage. Andrew, Mom tried a softer approach. We understand you're upset. But this isn't your responsibility. Whose is it, then? Yours? His? Because you've made it pretty clear you want nothing to do with it. We're not equipped. Neither was Grandma when Grandpa died. Didn't stop her. That was different. How? I was genuinely curious. How was a 35-year-old widow with 3 kids and no money better equipped than 3 successful adults with resources? They had no answer for that, because there wasn't one. Not one that didn't reveal exactly who they were. You're making a mistake, Dad said finally. One you'll regret for the rest of your life. No, I said, heading for the door. I'm avoiding a mistake. The one you're making. The one you'll regret when it's too late to fix it. I left them there, in their perfect kitchen, in their perfect house, perfectly awful in their selfishness. The next few weeks were a blur of arrangements. I moved into Grandma's spare room, over her protests. Found a part-time job at a coffee shop near her apartment. The owner, Mr. Chun, had known Grandma for years and was flexible about shifts when she had appointments. Started learning about medications and treatments and insurance forms. And through it all, we talked. Really talked in a way we never had when I was younger and she was invincible. Tell me about Grandpa, I said one evening as I helped her sort pills into weekly containers. What do you want to know? Everything. Dad never talks about him. She smiled, and for a moment looked decades younger. John was complicated, brilliant, funny, absolutely useless with money but could fix anything with his hands. He loved your father fiercely, all the children, but he loved the bottle more. He was an alcoholic, functioning until he wasn't. He'd go months sober, be the best father and husband in the world. Then something would trigger him, stress, memory, who knows, and he'd disappear into the bottle for weeks. That must have been hard. It was hell, she said simply. But it was also love. Real love, not the fairy tale kind. The kind where you choose to stay even when leaving would be easier. The kind where you fight for someone even when they've stopped fighting for themselves. Did he ever get better? He died trying. Car accident on the way home from an AA meeting. 6 months sober, longest stretch he'd managed. I choose to believe he'd have made it that time. Dad never told me any of this. Your father was 12 when John died. Old enough to remember the bad times, young enough to blame himself. He decided then that he'd never be like his father, never be poor, never be weak, never be vulnerable. And look what he became. Successful, strong, invulnerable, and completely unable to love anything he can't control. You don't think he loves us? I think he loves the idea of you, the successful son, the accomplished daughter. But the real you, the messy, complicated, human you, I don't think he knows how. That's sad. It's tragic, because in trying not to become his father, he became something worse. John, for all his faults, knew how to love. He just couldn't always show it through the disease. Robert can show all the signs of love, provision, protection, planning, but the feeling itself? I'm not sure it's there. We were quiet for a moment, the only sound the rain against the windows. Is that why you never remarried? I asked. Because you'd had real love? Partly, but mostly because I had 3 children to raise, and they needed all of me. There wasn't room for another person, another complication. I made my choice. Do you regret it? She considered this. I regret that my children grew up without a father. I regret that I couldn't be both parents, no matter how hard I tried. But remarrying just to give them a father? No, that would have been replacing something real with something convenient. And look how well convenient has worked out for them. Her cancer progressed faster than the doctors expected. Within a month, she needed more help than I could provide alone. We hired a part-time home health aide, Maya, a nursing student who needed the money and had the compassion my family lacked. Between the 2 of us, we managed. Word got out the way word does in close-knit neighborhoods. Grandma's friends from church started visiting, bringing food and company. Mr. Chen's wife organized a meal train. The book club she'd belonged to for 20 years started meeting at her apartment so she could still participate. See, I told her one afternoon as Mrs. Patterson from downstairs left after an hour of gossip and tea. You're not alone. You have people who love you. I have people who aren't related to me who love me, she corrected. There's a special irony in that. My family, meanwhile, maintained their distance. A few awkward phone calls, mostly to complain about my decision. Aunt Susan sent flowers once, expensive and impersonal. Uncle James texted occasionally, usually when he was drunk. Dad communicated through Mom, who communicated through guilt. Your father wants you to know you can still change your mind, she said during one of her rare calls. Come back to school. We'll arrange for professional care. We have professional care. Maya's excellent. I mean a facility. Somewhere equipped. Somewhere you don't have to see her dying? No thanks. Andrew, you're being unfair. I'm being honest. You should try it sometime. The calls stopped after that. One evening, about 2 months after the family meeting, Grandma had a bad night. Pain that the medication couldn't quite control, breathing that came hard and ragged. I sat by her bed, holding her hand, feeling useless. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? For this. For making you watch this. For being the burden they said I'd be. You're not a burden. You're my grandmother. There's a difference. Is there? You should be at school. Dating. Being 20. Not watching an old woman die. I am being 20. Just not the way they think 20 should look. And you know what? Their way looks pretty empty from here. She squeezed my hand weakly. I need you to do something for me. Anything. After I'm gone. Grandma, listen. After I'm gone, I need you to do something. Not for me. For them. For Dad and the others? Why? Because they're still my children. Because they're broken in ways they don't even understand. Because someday, maybe not soon but someday, they're going to realize what they've done. And when that day comes, they're going to need something from you. What? Forgiveness. I was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can do that. Not now. Now you're angry and you should be. But later, when the anger fades, when you understand that hurt people, when you see that they're victims of their own choices, then you forgive. Not for them. For you. Because carrying anger is like holding hot coals. You're the only one who gets burned. They don't deserve forgiveness. No one deserves forgiveness. That's what makes it grace. She died 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning while I was making her breakfast. Maya had just arrived and went to check on her while I scrambled eggs. Grandma hadn't been eating much, but she'd mentioned eggs might taste good today. Andrew, Maya called, and something in her voice made me turn off the stove. I knew before I entered the room. There's a quality to real silence that's different from sleep, an absence that fills space. Grandma looked peaceful, finally free from pain, but also just gone. The essential herness that had survived cancer and disappointment and 72 years of life had departed, leaving behind only the shell that had carried her. I sat on the bed, took her cooling hand, and cried. Not the desperate sobs of sudden loss, but the steady tears of inevitable grief. We'd known this was coming, had said our goodbyes in a dozen different ways over the past months. But knowing doesn't make it easier. It just makes it different. Maya called the hospice nurse, who called the funeral home. I called my family. Dad answered on the second ring. Andrew? Is everything? She's gone, I said simply. About an hour ago. Peacefully. Silence. Then I see. We'll handle the arrangements. They're already handled. She pre-planned everything. Paid for it with her savings. The funeral's Thursday at St. Mary's. 2 o'clock. She planned her own funeral? She had 3 months and no illusions about anyone else doing it. Yeah, she planned it. More silence. Andrew, Thursday. 2 o'clock. St. Mary's. Be there or don't. I hung up before he could respond. The next 3 days passed in a blur of necessary tasks. Death generates paperwork like nothing else, forms and certificates and notifications. I moved through them mechanically, grateful for something to do with my hands while my heart processed the loss. Grandma's friends rallied around me. Mrs. Patterson helped with the reception planning. Mr. Chun and his wife handled flowers. The book club ladies put together photo boards, collecting pictures from throughout Grandma's life. Watching them work, seeing how many people truly loved her, I realized something. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up. Thursday came gray and drizzling, appropriate weather for saying goodbye. St. Mary's was fuller than I'd expected. Neighbors, friends, people from the old neighborhood where Dad grew up. Maya came, dressed in black, tears streaming down her face. My roommate from school drove down, awkward in his suit but there because he knew it mattered. My family sat in the front row, looking uncomfortable in their grief. Or maybe just uncomfortable being in the same room with their conscience. I sat across the aisle with the people who'd actually been there for Grandma's last months. The divide was obvious, the symbolism unsubtle. I didn't care. Father McKenna, who'd known Grandma for 30 years, gave the eulogy. He talked about her strength, her kindness, her dedication to her children. He told stories that made people laugh through their tears. The time she'd organized a bake sale that raised enough to fix the church roof. her legendary pierogi that could make enemies become friends, the way she'd never missed a grandchild's birthday even when her own children forgot hers. Rose Cooper, he concluded, understood something that our modern world often forgets. That love isn't measured in grand gestures or bank accounts. It's measured in showing up, in small kindnesses, in choosing to see the best in people even when they show you their worst. She lived that truth every day of her life. And in her final months, she was blessed to have that love returned by those who truly understood its value. His eyes found mine as he said it, and I had to look away. After the service, at the reception in the church hall, I watched my family accept condolences with practiced grace. Dad shook hands and nodded gravely. Aunt Susan dabbed at eyes that never quite produced tears. Uncle James stood by the bar. Coffee only, this was a church, looking lost. It was a beautiful service, Mrs. Patterson said, squeezing my hand. Rose would have loved it. She planned most of it, I admitted. Down to the hymns. That sounds like her. Always taking care of everyone else, even at the end. As the reception wound down, I found myself standing by the photo boards, looking at pictures of Grandma through the years. There was one of her with my dad on his college graduation day, both of them beaming with pride. Another of her teaching Aunt Susan to drive. Uncle James's first basketball game, Grandma cheering from the stands. She loved them so much, I said to no one in particular. She did. I turned to find Father McKenna beside me, which makes their absence these past months all the more painful. How do you abandon someone who gave you everything? Fear, he said simply. Fear of death, of suffering, of facing their own mortality. It's easier to look away than to see yourself in someone else's decline. That's a cop-out. Yes, it is. But it's also human. Disappointing, heartbreaking, but human. She asked me to forgive them, eventually, and I don't know how. Father McKenna was quiet for a moment. Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it. It's about you deserving peace. But it's also not required to come quickly or easily. Sometimes the best we can do is be open to the possibility of forgiveness. The rest comes with time. My family left without speaking to me. I watched them go, these successful strangers who shared my DNA, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a hollow recognition that some bridges burn from both ends. The next few weeks were strange. After months of structured caregiving, I suddenly had nowhere to be, nothing urgent to do. I kept Grandma's apartment, using her small life insurance policy to cover the rent while I figured out next steps. The coffee shop increased my hours. I started looking into returning to school for spring semester. Then the letters came. The first was from Uncle James, handwritten on stationery I recognized from Grandma's desk. Andrew, I've started this letter a dozen times and thrown it away each time. There's no good way to say what needs saying. I was a coward. Worse than a coward. I was a son who failed his mother when she needed me most. I could make excuses, fear, finances, the pressure of appearing successful. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I didn't want to see her sick. Didn't want to face what we'd all become. It was easier to stay away, to let you carry the burden we should have shared. I'm in AA now, 30 days sober as of yesterday. It doesn't undo anything, doesn't make me a better son retroactively. But maybe it honors her memory in some small way. She always worried about my drinking, said I was following a familiar path. She was right about that, like she was right about so much. I don't expect forgiveness or even a response. I just needed you to know that I know. I know what I did. I know what I didn't do. I know what kind of man that makes me. And I'm trying to become something better, even if it's too late for her to see it. Your uncle, if you'll still have me, James. I read it 3 times before setting it aside. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to deny him even the comfort of confession. But I heard Grandma's voice. Hurt people hurt people. Uncle James had been hurting long before Grandma got sick. Maybe acknowledging that hurt was the first step toward healing it. The second letter came a week later, from Aunt Susan. Typed, of course. Even in grief, she was efficient. Andrew, I've been seeing a therapist since the funeral. She asked me to write this letter, though I don't think it will accomplish what she hopes. I want to blame you for making us look bad, for showing up when we didn't, for being the grandson she deserved when we couldn't be the children she needed. But I can't, because you did nothing wrong. You did everything right. And that's the mirror I can't stand to look into. I told myself I was protecting my children from trauma, my husband from stress, my career from disruption. But I was protecting myself from watching my strong mother become weak, from facing my own mortality, from admitting that success means nothing if you fail at love. She raised me alone after Dad died. Worked 2 jobs so I could have dance lessons. Wore the same coat for 10 years so I could have a new one. And when she needed me, I calculated the cost like she was a business transaction. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I haven't earned it. I'm just acknowledging the debt. The one I can never repay because the only currency she accepted was presence. And I was bankrupt. Susan. This one I folded carefully and put with James's letter. 2 down, 1 to go. But weeks passed with no word from my father. I wasn't surprised. He'd always been the last to admit error, the first to justify actions. If he was struggling with guilt, he was doing it privately, probably burying it under work and rationalization. I returned to school for spring semester, different than when I'd left. My classmates complained about exams and parties and petty dramas, and I nodded along, feeling decades older than my 21 years. Grief does that, ages you in ways that have nothing to do with time. But I also felt clearer about why I was there. Business school had been about security, about becoming successful like my father. Now it was about understanding systems well enough to change them. I switched my focus to nonprofit management, thinking about all the grandmothers who didn't have grandchildren able to drop everything and help. One evening in April, as Chicago shook off winter and pretended spring was possible, my phone rang. "Dad, can we talk?" he said without preamble. "We're talking. In person. There's something. I need to show you something." Curiosity won over resentment. We met at a Starbucks near campus, neutral ground. He looked older, grayer. Success was wearing on him in ways I hadn't noticed before. "You look good," he said awkwardly. "School going well?" "It's fine. What did you want to show me?" He pulled out a manila envelope, weathered and worn. From it, he extracted papers I recognized, Grandma's handwriting, though from years ago. "I found these going through some old boxes," he said. "Letters she wrote me in college. I'd forgotten." He trailed off, sliding the letters across to me. I picked one up at random, dated November 1987. "My dearest Robert," it read. "I hope this letter finds you well and not studying too hard. I know you want to make me proud, but you should know you already do. Every day just by being who you are. You don't need to earn my love, sweet boy. You have it, unlimited and unconditional, just for existing." I looked up at my father, saw tears streaming down his face. "I'd forgotten," he repeated. "How she loved. How easy it was to be loved by her. When did I decide it wasn't enough? When you decided other things mattered more." "No," he said slowly. "When I decided I didn't deserve it. Dad, your grandfather, he was a drunk. A loving drunk, but still. I watched her struggle, watched her sacrifice, and I promised myself I'd never be a burden like he was. I'd be successful, independent. I'd never need anyone or anything, including her, especially her. I couldn't bear the thought of her sacrificing even one more thing for me. So I became someone who didn't need sacrifice, who could provide instead of take. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that love isn't about keeping score. She needed you, at the end. Not your money or your success. Just you. I know. And I failed her. Failed you. Failed myself. He met my eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that I know. I know what I threw away. I know what kind of son I was. I know what kind of father that makes me. What are you going to do with that knowledge? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. How do you make amends to someone who's gone? How do you apologize to a ghost? You don't, I said, remembering Father McKenna's words. You apologize to the living. You become better. You love forward instead of backward. Your sister's pregnant, he said suddenly. Just found out. And all I can think about is how Grandma would have been such a wonderful great-grandmother. How she won't get to meet this baby because I was too scared to watch her die. Then make sure the baby knows about her. Tell stories. Show pictures. Make sure they know they come from a line of strong, loving people who sometimes lost their way but found it again. Is that possible? Finding it again. I thought about Uncle James 30 days sober, Aunt Susan in therapy, my father crying in a Starbucks over 20-year-old letters. I think Grandma would say it's never too late to become who you should have been all along. We sat there for another hour, looking through the letters, sharing memories, starting the slow work of rebuilding something from the ashes of what we'd burned. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. That night, I went to Grandma's grave for the first time since the funeral. The stone was simple, like she'd wanted. Rose Cooper, mother, grandmother, friend. Love given freely returns tenfold. They're trying, I told her, sitting on the grass beside the stone. All of them in their own ways. Too late for you to see, but maybe not too late to matter. The wind picked up, rustling the flowers people had left. Someone had planted rose bushes nearby, Mrs. Patterson probably. By summer they'd bloom, filling the air with perfume, turning a place of grief into something beautiful. I'm still angry, I admitted, at them, at the situation, at you for asking me to forgive when holding on to anger feels safer. But I'm trying to let it go, to honor what you taught me about love being a gift, not a transaction. A cardinal landed on the headstone, bright red against gray granite. Grandma had loved cardinals, said they were visitors from heaven. It cocked its head at me, chirped once, then flew away. I stayed until the cemetery closed, talking to her about school, about the coffee shop, about Maya who still texted to check on me. About the foundation I wanted to start someday, helping families navigate end-of-life care with dignity. About the ways her death had changed all of us, broken us open to truths we'd been too successful to see. 6 months later, at my sister's baby shower, I watched my family differently. Uncle James, for months sober, quieter but more present. Aunt Susan, who'd started volunteering at a hospice, learning to face what she'd run from. My parents, still imperfect but trying, including Grandma in conversations about the baby, making sure her memory lived. What do you think about Rose for a middle name? My sister asked, hand on her swollen belly. For Grandma. I think she'd love that, I said, and meant it. After the shower, as we cleaned up, my mother pulled me aside. I never thanked you, she said, for being there, for doing what we couldn't. Couldn't or wouldn't? Both. Well, we were cowards and you were brave. And because of that, she didn't die alone. Thank you for being the son we should have been. I was just being her grandson. It was enough. Yes, she said softly. It was everything. Later, driving home through streets Grandma and I had traveled during those last months, I thought about what she'd said about hurt people hurting people. How my father's fear of being a burden had made him unable to bear someone else's. How success could become a wall that kept out the very things that made life worth succeeding for. But I also thought about healing. How Uncle James was breaking a generational cycle of addiction. How Aunt Susan was learning to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. How my parents were trying to grandparent differently than they'd parented, with presence instead of just provision. Grandma was gone, but her lessons lived on. In the way I'd changed my major to help other families navigate loss. In the way her children were finally learning what she tried to teach all along. In the way a baby not yet born would carry her name and, hopefully, her capacity for unconditional love. The family meeting that had revealed the worst in us had, paradoxically, led to something better. Not perfect, we were too broken for perfect. But real, honest, present. And presence, Grandma always said, was the greatest gift you could give someone. I'd given it to her when she needed it most. Now, slowly, the family that had failed her was learning to give it to each other. Too late for her to see, but perhaps that was the point. True change happens not for applause or forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do. The coffee shop was busy when I got to work. The evening rush of students needing caffeine for late-night studying. Mr. Chun nodded as I tied on my apron. "How was the shower?" he asked. "Good. They're using Grandma's name. She'd like that. Living on in the next generation." A customer approached the counter. An elderly woman with her adult daughter, who was checking her phone impatiently. "What can I get you?" I asked. "Just a small coffee," the older woman said. "Black." "Make it two," the daughter said without looking up. "And hurry, we're running late." I made the coffees, watching the dynamic. The mother trying to engage, the daughter responding in monosyllables, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. "Here you go," I said, handing over the cups. "And ma'am, that's a beautiful scarf. Hand-knitted." The elderly woman's face lit up. "Yes, I made it myself. Been knitting for 60 years. My grandmother knitted too. Said it was meditation with productive results." We chatted for another moment about patterns and yarn, her daughter growing increasingly impatient. But I saw something shift in the older woman's posture, a straightening that came from being seen, being valued, being more than an errand to complete. They left, the daughter still hurrying, but the mother walking a little taller. Mr. Chun appeared beside me. "You have a gift," he said. "Seeing people, like your grandmother did. She taught me well." "No," he corrected gently. "She showed you. Teaching is what happens in the head. Showing is what happens in the heart. She showed you how to love. Now you show others. This is how good people live forever." The rush continued, but I carried his words with me through the shift. This is how good people live forever. Not in grand monuments or large inheritances, but in small kindnesses passed forward. In choosing to see people when the world looked through them. In showing up when showing up was hard. Grandma had raised 3 children alone, and they'd grown up to forget her worth. But she'd also helped raise me, and I remembered. And in remembering, in living what she'd taught, in passing it forward to strangers and family alike, she lived on. The family meeting had forced her children to live in shame and disgrace. But from that shame had come something better: recognition, repentance, and slow redemption. They'd failed her in life but were honoring her in death by becoming the people she'd always believed they could be. It wasn't the ending any of us would have written. But it was real, and it was ours, and it was still being written with every choice to be present instead of just successful. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, I knew Grandma was watching. Proud not of our achievements or our accumulations, but of our willingness to finally understand that love isn't a burden to be carried but a gift to be given. Freely, without calculation, exactly the way she'd always given it to us. The way we were finally learning to give it forward. Thank you for listening to my story. If you're like me, someone who spent years trying to earn love that was never truly offered, you know these aren't just stories. They're mirrors of our deepest wounds and greatest triumphs. Subscribe if these stories resonate with your journey. Hit that notification bell. Think of it as our regular meetup, where we share truths that others might not understand. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? What would you have done in my shoes? Your words matter to me, and they matter to everyone here who's walked this lonely path. Tomorrow, I'll be back with another story. Until then, remember, family isn't always blood, and sometimes the greatest gift is discovering who you truly are. Take care of yourself. You deserve it.